Well, hello everyone. It's Friday afternoon again, and time for a live stream. We're here in Harpenden in Eagle, which is normally Greenwich Mean Time, which is where time originally was um, regularized, and now it's still British summertime, but it doesn't feel like it. We just got another 2 or 3 weeks to go, and we go back to GMT. But it is Friday afternoon, and the week is coming to an end, and that's always gives us a good feeling. Weekend work continues in many ways. For me, it's usually this time of year working in the woods with chainsaw and axes and bringing wood in for the winter. Um, I want to talk to you today about something that's kind of sensitive, and I don't know. I often feel like before I start this kind of session that this is going to be shorter than most, and it might be. But so far, when I've thought that, it's never quite worked out. I use the full half hour and usually another minute or two. But these are all, especially my opinions, because this is a bit of a sensitive subject and not officially a YWAM or anything, and available on a range of platforms that you probably know about. But you can go to Spotify and iTunes and YouTube and so on and get these in the form of audio only or in video. Anyway, thank you for watching, whether you're watching live now or whether you've come across this later on. And thank you especially to those who take the time to drop a note and say what they enjoyed or ask a question or say what they didn't like about it. But I want to especially say thank you to Jim Orred, longtime YWAMer, almost as old as I am, who writes so consistently to say, I appreciated this, I appreciated that. I'm using this in this place, and I'm passing that around. And by the way, I just want to remind you, if you're using some of these for leadership issues, and this will be one of those that's kind of interesting for that, we have the leadership series available. You can find on my website, lynngreen.net or org, and you'll find that there's a 25 series, a series of 25 15-minute teachings on leadership, followed by some questions and some group activities and so on, if you wish to use it that way, or it's standalone if an individual wants to go through that. And it's a lot of what I teach. And I've been teaching recently in a few different places, Montana in particular, but also a bit at the YWAM Together gathering in 24. That was in Manila. And I'm due to go to a leadership training school in Cyprus soon, and then others in Norway and Bali and so on. So if you want to get all that teaching and in nice bite-sized bits, there it is. Have a look. I want to talk about why leadership conflicts are so difficult to talk about and deal with. And what I mean is this. I sometimes hear people say, the problem with people in YWAM leadership or leadership anywhere is they just close ranks. They got these problems. They just stick up for each other, and they're not accountable and so on. And I think, well, that's a long way from what's true. But I understand the feeling of that because conflicts between leaders or significant moral failure or significant leadership malpractice can make it really difficult to talk about. I want to explain why. And you probably experience undoubtedly what I have. These days with social media being what it is, and the way news spreads, we now have the spread of news kind of like some of it is just spread of gossip, which used to be just word of mouth, and now it's online too, and in many cases, because we're not face to face with people and we don't face any immediate backlash, we actually can be quite cruel with our communications and assuming we know people's motives and so on. So the whole thing has become quite a lot more toxic than it was, say, 10, 15 years ago. So we need to understand why it's difficult to talk about these things and what are the protections we can put in place where we don't run into the danger of leaders just protecting one another's backs, whether right or wrong. I talked to a guy earlier today, and he was from a nation that's kind of well known for organized crime. And I just chatting with him, he was a builder on the street where I live. And I was walking back from breakfast with a friend, and we began to chat, and he said, yeah, I came to this country to get away from the corruption. And that got me thinking again about something I've mentioned before on these podcasts or live streams. In a sense, relationships are so important, but they do not occupy in our lives a position of such importance that we will set aside truth. And really what he was talking about was an environment where there are various crime syndicates. They are so loyal to one another. They are family. They call themselves family. And loyalty to the family comes first before truth. They will lie. They will manipulate. They will steal. They will kill rather than do anything that is deemed to be disloyal to the family. And of course, that kind of exaltation of relationship over truth leads to unlivable societies. Truth has got to be first. That's why Jesus said, when it was reported to him that your mother and your brothers are outside wanting to talk to you, he said, as this very strange, if you look at it just superficially, comeback to them. So the response is, who are my brothers and my mother and my sisters? It's these here, who hear and obey the word of the Lord. And what's he saying? Well, those who walk in truth are my closest brothers and sisters, and my loyalty is to truth first. And at that point, I think, putting this gospel together, you can conclude that his brothers really did not believe in him, and therefore their advice to him and their pleading with him to come home and quit this foolishness was not God's advice. So how do we navigate through these conflicts and stay loyal to truth and yet not damage relationships? So it was brought to the forefront of my mind recently by a message that I received, and I want to read part of it. Okay, so I've been in the mission long enough to see conflicts, quite a few of them, between elders, leaders, on certain campuses. I pray for the people in pain, and I add my prayers for the resolution of the problems, and then one doesn't hear anything else. It's a problem, and then that's it. You never hear anything else. It's like it never happened, or everything's okay now, no questions. It is rather confusing, especially when someone leaves the mission or is no longer seen in the positions they've been serving in. And I get it. I think that really is confusing. This person goes on to say, they wrote to me from a different continent, just in case you are being tempted to say, oh, I think I know who that is. I realize that this is personal. The person had given me a few more details, and probably none of my business. But I know that people have been hurt, and people get hurt. More, Lynn, I find myself watching these things happen, and then changes occur, but I don't really, therefore, understand what's happened, and I feel nervous that I don't know what mistakes were made, and I might end up making the same mistakes because I haven't learned anything through this conflict and possibly through its resolution. Though I think I can say she's not even sure it has been resolved, but I get that. So I thought about it a bit, and I realized that I'm often drawn into some sort of conflict. Can I help resolve, or can I strengthen one side or the other? And these are never easy. These are always difficult. And I'm often in a quandary about what I can say and can't say. I think Marty will confirm that if I err in matters like this, I err on saying too much, because I like to see transparency. I like for people to know the truth of what's happening. but there are some things that really shouldn't be said, or to say is unwise, or hard to say in a way that is truthful. Now, let me explain what I mean. Um, so I gave this person who wrote the message, I think, 4 or 5 reasons why it's difficult to talk about conflicts with leaders or between leaders. And one is that the greater the number of people who know about a particular conflict, the less likely it is that it will be resolved. Well, that, you might say, that's an odd thing. No, really, I think it's completely true, because when people find out about a conflict, there's something about our commitment to try to find justice and try to be sure that justice is being done by others as well as ourselves. There's something about it that when we hear about a conflict, we have an inner, almost requirement to take a side. And we have to be really disciplined to not take a side. And so everybody who hears about a given conflict will tend to come down on one side or the other. And so 2 sides, or maybe more, grow with this conflict. And the feelings grow, and the more people talk about it, I don't know, it seems to grow. More emotive words are used. The nature of the problems get a bit more exaggerated with the telling. You probably found, like I have, that when you come into dispute with someone, or I have come into dispute with someone, and they are saying back to me what they don't like about what I've said, and they just change one word, but that one word gives a completely different tone to it. So I may have, say, used the term exaggeration, and they use the term lying, which technically it is, but lying is a greater depth of untruth than exaggeration, generally. Joy Dawson, bless her, if she was alive, she might dispute that, because she was really strong on exaggeration is a lie. And I've been convicted on that on more than one occasion. I have to go back and say, I'm sorry, what I just said was a bit of an exaggeration, and the accurate number was not 1.1 million, it was actually 3. Not million, just 3. I don't think I've ever exaggerated that badly, but you get the idea. Exaggeration is an untruth, and we need to be pretty careful about that. But it's an illustration of the point that we can change one word in what was said, and it makes it a more extreme statement. So, and the more you talk about that, and the more there are people who are supporting or maybe emotionally engaged with one side more than the other, the more the dispute will grow. And so when conflict arises or disputes arise, of necessity, they're likely to be resolved if the news of the conflict or the conversation around that conflict does not spread. But that makes it difficult, because then people think, well, right, you knew about this a long time ago. You said nothing. Yeah, that happens sometimes, and it's not always the wrong thing. So each person in a dispute, this is the other factor in it, let's say you have 2 leaders who are upset about something with each other. Each one will tend to tell their side of the dispute to others with a view to getting support. See, whenever we're in conflict with someone else, part of our inner guidance, our conscience, will be telling us that we need to get this right, or that maybe we were wrong, and we actually defend ourselves inside. We have an argument within ourselves, with a little bit of us, a conscience saying, I'm not sure that was right. Maybe you need to put that right. Maybe you need to go correct that statement, or it may be that what he or she has said is a factor that you need to take account of, and you've dismissed it, and you tell yourself stories in your head and then you want to verbalize them to others, that make your position stronger and to prevent you from having to humble yourself and ask for forgiveness. That's a very hard thing to do. We don't like to do it at all, and yet it is one of the great keys to spiritual growth. But back to the subject, the more people talk about it, the more sides, clear-cut sides, will develop. And, sometimes even in international relations between countries in the world and different ideas and philosophies, you find that the distance between two parties, international relations or whatever, is not so great until they really start disputing about it. And then they just march away from each other. Because each one is wanting to prove that their side is right as they talk about conflict. So talking makes the conflict go deeper sometimes and more difficult to resolve. So that's the first reason why sometimes we know there's a problem here when we've heard that this person is not speaking to that person. What's going on? And nobody will say. Well, that's one reason. And also, next point is in the early stages of a dispute, the people who are seeking to help can't immediately know which bits of the stories they've heard are true. That is really difficult. When there's a dispute that has gone beyond the local conversation between two people, and someone else is called in, well, already it has become two stories. One person here who's convinced they're right, and one person here who's convinced they're right. And when you hear this person talk over here, you think, oh yeah, this person has been so unfair and so untruthful. And then you talk to that person and think, no, this person. So Proverbs deals with that. And Proverbs 18:17, I think, oh man, if there's a scripture that I wish I had absolutely programmed into my head and into my spirit, this is it. That I would never ever make up my mind about something before I've heard both or all sides of the issue. And yet, again and again, I've gone into some kind of dispute or conflict thinking I know what the problem is and the solution to it is quite straightforward. Well, no, because there's a proverb about hearing both sides of the story, 18:17, and it states, in a lawsuit or dispute, the first to speak seems right until someone comes forward and cross-examines them. And of course, that's what you pay large amounts of money to lawyers for. Lawyers become very skilled at picking apart the other person's story and pointing out the contradictions, weaknesses, and holes in their story so that then their clients, maybe you're the client or I'm paying them, then I get to tell my story with a certain amount of credibility to start with because the other person has been proven to be questionable. So that proverb is a reminder that wise people consider both sides of an issue before drawing any conclusion. It also acknowledges that people may hear only one side of a story, and yet they're still expected to respond. And I've been pushed into responding having heard only one side of a story many times, and I always regret it. And there so often there are situations, especially if you have some sort of leadership or influence, people involved in conflict respect you, that one of the key figures in the dispute will want to get you on side. And they'll want to get you to say something that says, this person, let's make it for me, Lynn agrees with me. When really I haven't heard both sides of the story. I don't want to give anybody the reason to say that until I've heard both sides of the story. And yet I've been pushed into it, or I've let myself get into it on more than one occasion. So sometimes also, this is a little bit of a detour, but it popped into my mind that I was in a situation where I went into a YWAM base a long time ago, and I just felt the coolness towards me, and I could not understand why. People were It's like they were afraid of me and also didn't like me. And I thought, why? I haven't been here before. What's going on? And I've been having phone conversations with the leader of that YWAM center, again, a long time ago. And he was telling me what he was doing and so on. And what I didn't realize is he was trying to get me to back what he was doing. And I think I was foolish enough to give him some backing. So that when he had difficult things to say to people who were disagreeing with him, he would say, well, Lynn said, instead of saying that was his argument, it would be my argument. And I found out that I was already a prejudiced person in the disputes and the conflicts going on in that community. It was sad, and I didn't realize it for quite some time. And by that time, quite a few people had left. So remember, at the early stages, a wise leader will not want to talk about this conflict that they're involved with, trying to resolve, because they don't yet know what's really true. And it's awfully hard to find out, even with time, what is really true. But usually you can begin to come to some conclusions that are reasonably safe. But before you come to those conclusions, you don't want to be saying much, because any experience will let you know that if you do that, you might actually end up reinforcing the wrong stance. So that's the second reason. Maybe it's 3 or 4 reasons by your count, but that in mine, it's the second one. And then let's say the conflict has been concluded. And the ones that get talked about early on often are not concluded in a way that is satisfactory to all parties involved. So when it's concluded and someone has been deemed to be more right than the other, someone has been, it has been decided this person is in the wrong, their position in this is wrong, then it's really hard to talk about it without defaming that person. And without somehow making the situation, now resolved, more black and white than it was. And not taking into account the backstory on both sides, and especially if there's one person more disciplined than the other, it's very rare that the person who has been more disciplined than the other, in other words, people resolving the dispute to the best of their ability, have said, no, friend, I think you're going to need to change that, because generally your leader here is right. That person who has not been on the winning side is very unlikely to be satisfied with the outcome. And therefore, to talk much about the outcome will be to alienate that person, and you don't want to. Part of the question here with this person who wrote to me involved a leader eventually leaving YWAM over disputes. And when a leader, I'll read this so I get it right. When a leader's concluded that they will leave YWAM, it is difficult for the remaining people who are involved to explain what's happened without appearing to smear the reputation of the departing leader. Lauren once said to me, I think he's probably said it to many, but I think this was a personal statement, YWAM has to be like a bridge. Make it easy to get onto and easy to get off of. I periodically come across reports from teams or schools or ministries where it's easy to get onto but hard to get out of. And if you leave a particular team or location or school, it's a traumatic experience. You're made to feel guilty. You're made to feel like you're leaving the will of God. And I just want to say, to anybody out there who's in leadership in any way, any kind of responsibility as one of the shepherds for God's people, that term shepherding in many places has been really devalued, but still we are called as shepherds. The Good Shepherd calls us to be shepherds, both in the Old Testament and the New. if you are responsible for the well-being of people in spiritual leadership, remember, your words weigh a lot. And if you suggest or imply or state clearly that someone planning to leave is leaving the will of God, you're in real trouble. Because you can't, you may feel strongly about it, but don't say it. Don't say it, because we just don't know all the situations. We don't always know the will of God. Now, I'm saying something here pretty black and white. And I'm not saying there's never been an exception to that. I'm not saying there's never been a case where somebody in leadership should not have said, I don't believe that it's in the will of God for you to leave. Such a heavy thing to say. But it's impossible to say it's always wrong. But I could say 99.9% of the time it's wrong. Because if you have people stay who want to go because they feel that to leave would be to stray from God's will, but they really don't want to stay, you don't want to try to keep people who don't want to stay. And let's be honest. At times, a departing person means departing some funds departing. Their school fees or their staff contributions or whatever. Boy, don't ever let money, I speak to leaders here, don't ever let money, either the lack of it or the provision of it, be a deciding factor in how you deal with your relationships. It's just not right. So when a person has decided to leave YWAM, or maybe we've asked them to leave, that's rare, but it has happened, then it's really difficult to answer people's questions about what happened without smearing the people involved or appearing that you've taken pretty extreme action. You resorted to an extreme position for reasons that don't seem worthy of it. And if you say, well, it was because of this and this and this, then you're into smearing a person's reputation, and it's very, very awkward. So all these are reasons why it's difficult to talk about leadership conflict during and after, unless it has been, as we see from time to time, where a high-profile leader has been engaged in unethical or immoral activities, has covered it up, then there's a time to say, this has happened, and that's why this person needs to stand down from ministry. But when it's dispute between people and still the what actually happened is disputed, it's difficult. Now let me see if there's anything else here. So I can conclude by saying, there I go again. Use almost the entire half hour. When a leader has concluded that they will leave YWAM, it is difficult for the remaining people who are involved to explain without appearing to take sides. So there are very good reasons why we don't talk much about leadership conflicts and disputes. And I find it always really difficult to know when to talk about it and explain situations, because partial explanations don't work very well, and yet thorough explanations can run the risk of impugning the reputation of people involved. So it's difficult. And what I can say, therefore, is let us not spread troubling, bad, unsettling news beyond what has to be shared. And for all of us who are aware of a conflict or are told there is one, let's not let our curiosity push us to the point that we encourage slander or gossiping. There's something about our nature, I speak for myself, I love to hear good news. But there's a perverse part of me that actually likes to hear bad news about other people too. And that is a side of me that I can only keep within reason by repentance and just self-discipline of what I want to know and don't want to know and why. And there's many a time when you hear about something and you have to tell your inner person, no, you don't need to know. Don't ask. Don't ask. Sometimes I find myself in an internal conversation saying, why do I want to know that? I don't need to know that. So the want to know is not a good thing. And I will not ask. I will not push. Well, those are some reasons why sometimes it seems like people involved in leadership close ranks and protect one another. That's often not the motive. The motive is to say, it's hard to talk about this. And if you don't really need to know, then I probably won't talk to you about it, because we want to keep it as contained as possible. Well, I hope that is helpful. It's an unusual live stream for me, but because it's kind of narrow application, but it's a narrow application that's really important at certain times. And I trust that you may find it helpful. If you run into situations where this applies, then pass it on to others, as it might be helpful when they are engaged in difficult conversations and two sides of an argument. Thanks very much for watching and listening.